Welcome to the Scriptcase webinar. My name is Jamie Oates and I'm your host today. During today's webinar, we will be looking at the control application and creating our own custom HTML forms using the control application within Scriptcase. Now we are starting here within the samples project. I already have created the samples project, and the reason why is simply for database access and so forth if we decide to use it for the control application. Of course, we can use the control application without a database, but in general terms, our Scriptcase project requires a database to create the applications. So in most cases, we will require one. So let's go ahead and start by creating our control application, and I will go ahead and name it here HTML. So control_HTML, and then I will also decide to set the template HTML manually. Now, if I do not select this, we will have the default control application, which is where we then need to add our own fields and so forth, instead of designing one within HTML. So let's go ahead and create this. Okay, so now within the control application, we can first of all see we have here on the left-hand side our main menu, and here it indicates user HTML. Now the control application, this specific control application using the HTML template, is the only application with this option within the left-hand menu. So with this option selected, we can see on the right, we have first of all a check button, which we'll come back to in a moment. And we have here also a HTML layout for a form already. Now on the right here, we can see here HTML, CSS, JavaScript, external library, preview, as well as create fields. Now the HTML, CSS and JavaScript are each individual files. So here, for instance, we can code our HTML form, and then when we are ready, we can go ahead and run our application. But one important factor, regardless of using the external library or using the integrated HTML, CSS, JavaScript fields, is to create the fields. So even here where we just have one field, I need to go ahead and create this field first, define what our field is for, save it, and then I can run my application. Without doing so, we will be presented with an error message. So I will go ahead there in a moment, and we can see here first of all our control application with my field and the confirm button, which we have defined here within our custom HTML. Now of course I can come here, I can manually then edit this how I please and add our own code in here. Now we will see this time that we now have two fields, and when a field, as we see here, we have two fields and they're identified with the same name. No new field was found in the HTML used by the application. And this is simply because we have two fields here with the same name. So it's important that each field has its own identifier. So I will type here field and new, and now if I go ahead and create fields, we will have a new field which we've now defined available within our form, and I can go ahead and run that, and we can now see that we have two fields within our custom HTML form. Now of course this is very basic, and using the external libraries provides us many more advantages and options which we will be looking at as we continue. Okay, so let's continue. What is, I'll go ahead and we'll first remove our fields which we've added for this form because we no longer require them, and we'll come back to our HTML and also remove our new entry here. And now if I go ahead and run the form again, we will now see that we have no form fields defined, and that is simply because we have no fields here. We haven't gone ahead and created our fields as we did previously. Now what we want to do really is use an external library. Now this is where the control application gets much more interesting, and we can actually create and design our own custom forms. So once we've selected external library, we can see here we have do not use external library, which is selected, and we have our HTML, CSS and JavaScript options available. Now if I select to use external library, the HTML, CSS and JavaScript are now no longer available within our project. Now we can see here a full list of external libraries which I have available, and as you can see I have a few. I have here specifically one for the PHP Excel, as well as for Bootstrap, Font Awesome, for mind maps, and so forth. So we'll be using here these Scriptcase samples, as this is one we all have, and we can really see what's going on here and use these forms for our own use. Now, before we go ahead and jump into this, let's continue with the right-hand menu here. We can see here, you can choose to use an external library from Scriptcase instead of saving the HTML content in the application itself, which is these first three options here, which is there where we would then create the code, the HTML code within the application. So instead of doing that, we are using an external library, and we have here to create, edit, and external libraries. We can access the main menu from Scriptcase. So let's go ahead and do that, tools, and we have here external libraries. Now we have here the samples, and as I already mentioned, I have some external libraries here myself. Now I could go ahead here, create a new library. I can define whether it's for public or for the project. I can then indicate a library name. Now within this library, I then have two options. Now, first of all, here I have the test library, which I've just created. And before using a library for any project, we must specify use library and then save the project libraries. Now, this will then save all of the files from the library which we have either uploaded or created into our project, and then allow us to use them within the control application, as well as other forms or grid applications and so forth, depending on the library which we are creating or uploading. So I'm going to go ahead here and select edit. And now within the edit, I can come here and I can create a new directory. So here I can say a CSS directory, and I can also then create a JavaScript directory. So we have all our files separated, and then I can also go ahead and create a new file. So I'm just going to call this index, and we need to add the extension onto this .html, otherwise it will be a standard file and not as a HTML file. So if I go ahead and select create, I now have my index file. I would essentially have my CSS file within the CSS folder and the JavaScript folder here. Now we can also go ahead and upload an entire zip file. Here we would just drag and drop, so we can create basically our file and folder structure on our own hard drives, and then add them to a zip file, and then just simply upload them here. And this would then give us all the files that we want to use, which we've then hand coded previously. Now I'm going to go ahead and close this, and we're going to look at the samples now. So we've seen now how to add our own library. Now let's look at a complete library which we have available here already. So for the Scriptcase one, we have the libs, which is then all the library files for our forms. So we have here Bootstrap, CSS, jQuery, JS, and message error. And we can see in here we have all the Bootstrap files required, and so forth. Now we can do the same thing for just about any other library available, meaning for Font Awesome icon kit, or using other PHP libraries which we may require to use within our project. So we can add these within external libraries and then use them within our forms. Now within the control HTML form, it is not the case of using any type of library. Now remember here, we are wanting to design a custom HTML form. Now this can be a login form, this can be any type of form. So let's go ahead and check some of these out here before we come back here to the external libraries. So within here, the external libraries, we have here the samples, we have the form folder, and again, we see here the structure as well as two forms available. If I select here the preview button, I can preview within Scriptcase what this form looks like. Now at the moment these forms are not working, nothing for this form itself works, but everything is pre-configured, ready for me to use this form with the control application. So now let's go ahead and look at form 02, and if I preview this one, we will see that we have a completely different type of form. Now if I'm going to go down here to the login folder, and here we also have our login forms. Now you may already be aware of these from the security suite, where we can select to use a custom HTML form, and then we can already define to use these predefined login pages from Scriptcase. So previewing each of them, we can see that they are fully customized login pages, or custom forms essentially, and we want to use one of these within our application. So for the login form, of course, we would want to use one of these within a the security application itself. And there, for instance, if we come back to one of these, we see here we have the username and password, which is then would be required. And we have then also the links here, which we can then also define. And of course, a submit button, which is also always required, regardless of the type of form. So we want to go ahead and create one of these basic forms here. So I'm going to go ahead with form 1 and again preview. So this is the form we're going to use. First name, last name, username, email address, password, and confirm the password, as well as then agree, register, and sign up buttons are available. Now we can create any type of form we like. So before we go ahead and do that, let me go and show you some other forms which I've also created here previously. And you can see that we have here, for instance, we have a payment form, so you can create a custom payment form. Of course, you'll see that some elements in here still need to be adjusted, but in general, you're going to see that we can create any type of form that we want, and then we can basically import it within our application. Now here, for instance, I have a complete registration wizard, and we could then go through here and create a custom form for this. Okay, so sticking to our sample forms, we have our form 1. Now on the left hand side here, remember we have our check button. Now if I click this, it will scan this form and make sure all of the fields or tags within the fields are in place. So let me come back here first of all to the external libraries, and we are using form 01. So let me open this, and now we can see the HTML code of this form. Now remember, this is just a straight HTML file which has either been created here or uploaded. It makes no difference. So first of all, we need to require the inclusion of our reference tags for the style sheet as well as JavaScript, which are required for our form. Now here we are using Bootstrap, so we need to include the Bootstrap library. Now we can see here sc_lib current, and of course this will change depending if it is for project and so forth. And if we come down here now to our form fields, we can see here, for instance, we have on our field, on the password field, we have the SC field info password and SC field class. So the class is for Scriptcase to add any required CSS classes within here. And then here, this tag is actually to identify this field as the password field for our form. We then also have the same here for email. Here we have the email, and here also the user input, the first name and last name inputs also. Now, if I come back here to my form, we will see this here. We will have the first name, last name, username, email, password, and so forth, as we see here within our control application. Now, if by chance, say for instance, I remove here the user, and I can actually save these files because they're sample files, but say for instance, one of these tags were missing or incorrect, then when we come here to our control and we run a check, it will actually indicate an error message here. So we can see here at the bottom we have an optional. And now again, the best way for me to show you this is actually to show you a separate form again, which displays some error messages. So if I check a few of some of these, because most of these are complete. And nope. And there we have one. So here we can see on this login form, which template form I am missing the SC form hidden, the scjslib tag, as well as the SC page charset tag. Now, if I click on any of these, even these which are in order, it will provide us the information we require for this specific tag. So here it says SC form hidden. Markup for inclusion of form fields class is required for initialization of input validation routines. It must be placed inside the tag input of all form fields. So here we see, for instance, SC field class on the input, and on the form, we require the SC form attribute. Now for this form itself, we have no hidden fields, so I don't really think it's an important field. And then here we also require to add this tag for the libraries, and then also again for the page character set. Now if I come here to the external libraries again and look at our form 01, we can see that we have these tags here. We have the character set, here we have the SC form hidden, and then here we also have the form attribute and so forth. Okay, so making sure that we have these tags is very important. We have this indicator here to tell us which tags we require, how to apply them. Everything is quite straightforward in that sense. So really, we then need to go ahead and create our custom form. We can then check it, make sure we have our tags. We can then, if our tags are not included, access the external libraries and modify them here directly without having to upload and download our files constantly. Remember, this is only a sample project, so we are not able to edit and save or change these forms, but we can of course copy them and apply them to our own projects or create new libraries from these. So coming back to our control application, we're going to go ahead now and preview. Now this is the form we are going to use. So now we are going to go ahead and select to create fields. Now by selecting to create the fields, the control application will add the fields here within the left-hand menu. At the moment we have none. So if I go and run this application, it will tell me we have no fields defined. And this is what this is for. So here we need to define the fields within our form. So if you remember, we have the confirm password, the email, last name, first name. So let's modify that. First name and password, as well as then the user. Now I should also indicate that the labels here don't really matter unless we provide the tags within our form. So we can also change the placeholder to be a specific Scriptcase tag, which will then allow us to control the title or label of the field within the application itself instead of within the HTML file. So that is of course a choice. So once we've confirmed and configured our labels and so forth, we of course want to come here and specify our field types if they are different from a basic text field. Now in this case, an email is a text field, a password is also a text field, and so forth. We can then just go ahead and click save. Now we can see here that our fields have now been created, and now within our events we can come here and specify what we want to do with these fields. So we could say, for instance, on script init, we could say the email field, for instance, we clear this every time. So every time the form starts, this field is nothing. And then, for instance, on validate, we can then go ahead, perform some checks, and of course, insert these fields into our tables as we would do so normally. Now, the events are a very important factor of using the control HTML forms. The reason being is of course that when we use a normal form, the insert, the fields and so forth are all automated by or created by Scriptcase. We don't have very much there to do. But as we have defined our own form and our own fields, we do need to use the events to control what happens with these fields. So as mentioned here now within the onValidate or onSuccess, for instance, we can now insert these fields, or we can send an email or whatever we want to do using the examples and macros and so forth which we have available. Now if I go ahead and remove our inserts here within the events, and if I now go ahead and run our form, we will see that our form now has no error messages within here, indicating that all fields are available and applied, and our form will now run. And we can see here we now just enter our first name, our last name, and we then need to define what happens with this specific data once we click these buttons. So within our fields, we have our fields defined, and then we come to our events and define our events on what we want to do with this control application. Okay, so let's go ahead then and actually do something with this form and not just create the form. Let's get it to insert some fields and also send an email. So on the script init, I'm first of all going to define that all fields start with empty, and then I'm also going to go to onValidate. And within the onValidate, I can use one of the examples, insert a record into another table. And then here I can just go ahead and define our fields. Okay, so I've already added the fields here, and we have here the email. Now, of course, we need to add then the actual field variables in here as well, as field variables, not globals. So if I go ahead and do that, and now we have all of our fields defined. Of course, the confirm password is not there Now what I will do is I will enclose this in an if statement. So now if the password equals the confirmed password, then of course our validation should be a success, and then we can go ahead and insert our new data, and if not, then to display an error message. Now then on the onValidate success, for instance, we can come here and select to send an email. Once our form has been configured and sent, then to inform our admin of the new entry or the new form, however we so please. So using a control HTML application is quite simple and straightforward. Really the most difficult part is really the form construction that you build within HTML and ensuring that all of the tags are available. So I'm just going to go one last quick look at the samples and remind you of those tags. So within the form, we have here form 01. We first of all need the library path, and then also the tags within the fields, defining what the fields are, as well as then also the submit button. In some cases, depending on the type of form, will also require some tags. And here we have this here. SC class field is here on the register button, but not on the sign in. So this form itself may actually cause some issues when somebody goes to sign in. It may not actually work. So continuing on, the form 2 is pretty much identical. Of course, it's a slightly different form, but again, we can see here the same tags are being used and are required for this form usage. Now if I continue on down here to the submit button again, we can see here the submit form call, which is then required for the majority of forms on the submit button so that it actually works in the first place. Okay, so I hope you've learned a great deal, and if you have any questions, of course, our support is also always available for you. And I hope to see you next time. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.